In this video, we're going to look at the letters V, W, and X in our ongoing exploration of literary devices and poetry prompts at the same time. V is for Volta, and a Volta is a turning point, a major shift within a poem. We've spoken a little about stanzas and how sometimes they can affect change within the poem, within the poem's mood or tone, how they might cause a change or a shift, but also an intensification of that mood and tone. But they are not the main shifts that occur. That is the Volta, the main turning point that maybe holds the surprise or excitement of a new direction for the poem that will lead us towards its conclusion. In some formal poems, like the sonnet form, it feels as if the Volta is actually almost built into the structure of the poem itself. I say almost built in because that choice about how and when the poem changes direction ultimately lies with the poet. However, time and again you can read sonnets by great writers, whether it's by Seamus Heaney or Edna St Vincent Millay. You will find time and again on that ninth line, yes, that's specific, a point in the poem's development. Line 9 is where that shift usually occurs. And there's a reason for that. There's no coincidence that main shift is happening there, because if we were to break a sonnet down into its constituent parts, we would find that the sonnet is really a three-part thing. There are three movements within the sonnet, and they occur over 4 lines of poetry. So the first 4 lines of the sonnet is introducing the idea or theme of the poem. The next 4 lines is going to develop that further. And then at the beginning of the third quatrain, or that third block of 4 lines, there's going to be a major shift, which then leads the reader towards the conclusion, the last rhyming couplet of the sonnet form. So the prompt is to write a free verse sonnet, and sonnet is a form we associate with love, but we're going to take a kind of postmodern twist on the sonnet form by writing a 13-line sonnet, because this is a sonnet about being unlucky in love. So it has 13 lines, and maybe it's about love that is doomed to fail before it even has a chance to start. Maybe it's about the end of a relationship, but there are 13 lines in our postmodern version, our free verse version that doesn't have to rhyme, our version of the sonnet. And I want you to think about the structure of those 13 lines like this, exactly the same way as I described the structure of the formal sonnet. That is that we introduce the main idea or theme of our poem in the first 4 lines, and then in the next 4 lines we develop those ideas further. And on the 9th line of that poem, we are going to create a shift or a move towards a new direction that is then going to be developed in the following lines 10, 11, and 12. And then we're going to land our knockout punch, the way we bring everything to a close, with that 13th line. The letter W is for weekend, not weekend as in Saturday and Sunday, but week as in W-E-A-K. And just to share with you that the level of patriarchy pervasive in our culture, and literary culture too, a week ending is also known as a feminine ending. One can only presume because there was a time when people thought that the word feminine could not possibly mean strong. However, moving on from that, I want to talk a little about these weak or feminine endings and exactly what that means and how we can use this as a device within the structure of a poem. So when we talk about weak endings, we're really talking about the iambic line. And as we've talked about previously, we know that the iambic line is one where there are 5 strong beats, a regular pattern of beats where there is a beat within a stressed syllable every other syllable, and there are 10 syllables per line. However, with the feminine ending or the weak ending, there is an additional unstressed syllable in that iambic line. So, for example, if you think of Shakespeare's most famous line, "To be or not to be, that is the question." There is an 11th syllable added. That jun of question is the 11th unstressed syllable, known as a feminine ending or a weak ending. I mention this, I keep referring to the weak and the feminine and the strong and the masculine, because that actually relates to our poetry prompt, where we're going to challenge some of these firmly held notions. But first, let's look at an example from a famous poem of alternating lines of feminine and masculine endings. So here is Kipling's famous poem If, and I'm going to read some lines out loud. If you can keep your head when all about you are losing theirs and blaming it on you, if you can trust yourself when all men doubt you, but make allowance for their doubting too, if you can wait and not be tired by waiting, or being lied about, don't deal in lies, or being hated, don't give way to hating, and yet don't look too good nor talk too wise. And the poem continues, if, and then the conclusion of that poem is, if you can do all these things, you'll be a man, my son. So it's a poem about masculinity or ideas surrounding masculinity, not always the toxic notions that are also pervasive in our culture. However, we are going to challenge this. Before we do that, let's look at those lines again. And if I just highlight these lines, you can see the first four lines. If you can keep your head when all about you. So the last word of line 1, you, is unstressed, and it's also an enjambed line, meaning that the sentence continues onto line 2. But on line 2, the you is a strong syllable and is therefore a masculine ending. If you can keep your head when all about you are losing theirs and blaming it on you. So it's interesting that the poem has this kind of binary quality, masculine or feminine, then masculine, and so on and so forth until the very end. So your prompt is to write a poem with alternating lines of feminine and masculine endings. The first line is going to have 11 syllables and is going to end on an unstressed, weak or feminine ending. And the sentence will continue on to line 2. And when it gets to the end of line 2, it will end on a strong, masculine, stressed syllable with a point of punctuation. So line 1 is enjambed. The sentence continues on to line 2. And line 2 concludes with an end-stopped word. And then the poem continues in this fashion. And your poem is going to be about what it is or what it means to be a man today, or what it means to be a woman, or what it means to be non-binary. How might you work those things into this poem? We're not looking to create a pastiche of Kipling's If, but we are using that as the basis of a new poem to create new ideas about masculinity in the 21st century. This is a really interesting prompt. I hope you have fun with it. It's a difficult one too, because you're writing in these alternating lines where the meter, the metrical structure has to be clear, but also serve the poem. So, the letter X. I have to say, I found it very difficult to find a literary device. In fact, I did not find a literary device beginning with the letter X, but we are going to talk about the letter X, and I am going to give you a poetry prompt of sorts. The very first thing that came to mind when thinking about this video on the letter X was an email I received recently from a friend, and in that email was the draft of a poem that was an epistolary poem, an epistle, a poem that takes on a letter form. And it also included lots of X's, which I'm going to talk about right now. But first, let me just discuss a little further the focus of the letter or the poem. It was in the form of a letter from a government agency, and the language was very cold and detached, and it felt very bureaucratic. And yet the thing that was being discussed was the deceased partner of the speaker in the poem. So there was something very personal about this poem and its contents, written in this cold and detached way. And what the poet had done was to redact the name of the addressee, and also throughout the poem had used, at various points, redacted some of the text. Now this put me in mind of erasure poetry. And if you don't know what erasure poetry is, it's simply to take an existing document, it could be an email, it could be a letter or an article in the newspaper, and to create new meaning by redacting lots of the text in block black capitals. So, as you might imagine, on some secret document where the name is being blacked out. However, and this would create new meaning. In fact, on Twitter recently, there was a fad of poets uploading rejection letters from literary magazines where they had redacted certain words to create some humor. So, for example, one I remember, there was a sentence which said, "Please do not hesitate to send us further examples of your work." And this had been played with by the poet and some words redacted, and the new version read, "Please do hesitate to send us further examples of your work." So redaction can be used for comic effect, but also used to carve out new meaning in an erasure poem. That's not exactly what was happening in my friend's poem, but what was very interesting was, rather than using black block capitals to redact words, they had used the letter X. So, "Dear XXXX," and so on. And then at the end, at the close of the letter, "Yours sincerely, XXX," etc. And these X's put me in mind of the way in which sometimes at the close of a letter, we might use an uppercase and lowercase x to symbolize a kiss. And that's really what I took these X's in the poem to mean, or to symbolize, this very cold and detached poem with these kisses, covered in kisses, between the deceased and her partner, and their partner, the speaker of the poem. Very, very effective. So the poetry prompt, is it a prompt? It's more about a poetic exploration. It's just to get a blank piece of paper and start with the letter X in the middle of the page. And then offshoots from that letter X. I want you to write in as many ideas and concepts and ways in which we represent X, or the way X is represented in the English language to mean something else. Sometimes we talk about things that are X-rated. Sometimes you see 3 X's when we are referring to things of a sexual, explicit nature. Something that is X-rated. X marks the spot, an X-ray. And see if you can play with this, leaning towards the idea of crafting a poem which is a kind of poem to the letter X. If you're enjoying this video, please do click the like button and the subscribe button, and you can also click the Buy Me a Coffee link. If you really want to support writers and their writing, you can buy their books, and here is one such book. It is called PhotoFit by Martin Jago. I will put a link in the description below to where you can buy a copy of this very handsome tome.